Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Short Ghost Stories, a place where ghostly whispers drift through the darkness, and where the fog rolls in after midnight, and where spine-tingling tales of ghosts and spirits leave you terrified beyond belief. Short Ghost Stories, long after midnight. The Beast of Black Hallow. They arrived at Black Hallow in the late afternoon, when the year had already begun to turn inward on itself. Autumn had settled deeply there. The air was cold and damp, carrying the faint smell of peat and standing water, and a pale fog lingered between the low hills and the dark line of woods that encircled the village like an unbroken fence. The road that led them in narrowed as it went, as though it had once been wider but had since been reclaimed by neglect and moss. Linda was the first to feel it. She did not say anything at first, only slowed her pace slightly as they passed the first of the houses. They were old, unmistakably Victorian, their brickwork darkened with age, their windows tall and narrow, their porches sagging under the weight of years. Lamps burned behind thick glass, but the light seemed reluctant to escape into the street. "It's like the place is holding its breath," she said at last. Ron laughed. "That's what villages do when strangers turn up." Jess glanced at him, then at the houses. "They're watching us," she said. "Everyone watches newcomers," Howard replied mildly. "It's human nature." Tyler said nothing. He walked a step behind the others, his eyes never leaving the fog that crept in thin strands along the edges of the street. They found the inn at the center of the village, a low, broad building with a hanging sign that creaked softly in the wind. A black raven was painted there, wings half spread, its beak open as if in warning. "The Raven," the sign read. The door opened with a heavy sound and warmth spilled out to meet them. Conversation died the moment they stepped inside. It was not dramatic. No one turned openly. No one stared. The silence simply arrived, thick and complete, like a curtain drawn across a stage. A dozen eyes lowered to glasses and plates. Someone coughed. Somewhere, a chair scraped softly against the floor. "Well," Ron muttered, "aren't we popular?" The innkeeper looked up from behind the bar. He was an older man with a broad face and tired eyes. He studied them for a long moment before nodding once. "Rooms?" he asked. They nodded, suddenly grateful for something so ordinary as a transaction. Keys were handed over. Supper was served, stew thick with root vegetables and bread still warm from the oven. Beer followed. Slowly, conversation returned to the room, though it remained subdued, cautious. After the second round, Linda leaned forward. "We heard about the legend," she said lightly, "the one about the beast." A few patrons stiffened. One man stood abruptly, leaving his drink untouched, and went out into the fog without a word. Another shook his head. "Children's stories," he muttered, though his hands trembled as he lifted his glass. An older woman leaned close, her voice low. "You leave tonight," she said, "before the moon climbs." Ron smiled. "And miss all the fun." That earned him a look of naked fear. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It comes to feed." Laughter followed, too loud, a little unsteady. A pair of men at the far table, already well into their drink, began arguing over details. how tall it was, how fast, whether it could be killed. Their words slurred, their eyes bright and unfocused. "Wolfman," one said. "Beast of Black Hollow," said another. "Devil in fur," said a third. The innkeeper slammed a glass onto the bar. "That's enough," he said. Then more quietly to the five of them, "Here is a map. Make sure to be back before darkness falls." Linda smiled, thanking him. Ron rolled his eyes. They took the map. They left. Outside, the village lay empty. Doors were closed, windows darkened one by one. Lanterns burned on porches, their light barely reaching the street. Above them, clouds thinned, and the moon, full and pale, began to rise. They walked without speaking. The cemetery lay at the edge of town, its iron gate hanging open. Headstones leaned at odd angles, names worn smooth by time and rain. As they entered, something moved between the rows. The graveyard keeper appeared as if from the earth itself. A tall, thin man wrapped in a heavy coat, his face deeply lined. "You shouldn't be here," he said. They jumped. Howard recovered first. "We're just looking around." The man shook his head slowly. "This is the wrong night." Tyler swallowed. "Why?" The keeper's eyes flicked to the moon. "Because it won't stop once it starts." "Stop what?" Ron demanded. The man stepped back, already retreating into shadow. "Leave Black Hollow," he said. "Now." Then he was gone. They laughed it off afterward, but the laughter did not last. They walked farther from the cemetery than they intended, guided more by instinct than decision, until the village lights were no longer visible and the ground began to soften beneath their feet. The marshland lay open before them, dark water reflecting broken fragments of moonlight, and beyond it the woods rose thick and unbroken, their edges blurred by mist. Here they stopped. Ron declared it far enough. Howard agreed, unfolding the map once more, though it offered little comfort now. Linda knelt and began arranging stones for a fire, her movements deliberate, almost ritualistic, as though repetition itself might impose order on the night. When the fire finally caught, it burned low and steady, its light pressing back the darkness only reluctantly. Shadows gathered just beyond its reach, deep and layered, as if the woods were leaning closer to listen. For a while, it felt almost normal. They sat close together, passing bottles and murmuring jokes that came too quickly, as though silence might invite something unwelcome. Ron held court, retelling the graveyard keeper's warning with exaggerated solemnity, mimicking the man's voice until Jess laughed despite herself. "You should have seen your face," Ron said to Tyler. "I thought you were going to bolt." Tyler forced a smile. He didn't sound like he was joking. "No one ever does," Ron replied. "That's how legends work." Howard leaned forward, warming his hands. "Legends usually grow from something real," he said. "A wolf, a murderer, a story passed down until it loses its edges." "And gains claws?" Jess asked. Howard shrugged. "Fear fills in the gaps." Linda listened without speaking. Her gaze kept drifting toward the trees, where the firelight faltered and failed. "I don't think it's just a story," she said quietly. Ron snorted. "Of course you don't. You want it to be real." "I want to understand it," Linda replied. "That's different." Jess studied her. "What do you think will happen?" Linda hesitated. "I think Something will come close enough for us to know we shouldn't have stayed. Tyler shifted uneasily. He reached into his pack and produced a string of garlic, holding it up like a charm. "For protection," he said weakly. Jess burst out laughing. "That's vampires." Ron wiped tears from his eyes. "Well, if the beast's Italian, we're saved." Even Tyler laughed then, the sound thin but genuine. For a moment the night loosened its grip. The fire popped sharply. They all fell silent. From the woods came a sound, low, drawn out, and deliberate. It was not a growl exactly, nor a call. It carried weight, intention. "Did you hear that?" Jess whispered. The sound came again, closer this time. Branches shifted somewhere beyond the light, cracking softly under pressure that was far too measured to be wind. Howard frowned. "Probably an animal." "Animals don't circle," Linda said. And then they heard it move, not toward them, around them. The sound passed behind the fire, then to their left, then farther back, always just beyond the edge of light. Something exhaled, a wet, steady breath that stirred the fog near the ground. Tyler's laughter died in his throat. "It's breathing." Ron stood abruptly. "Enough." He stepped toward the trees, firelight clinging briefly to his back before surrendering him to the dark. "Come on," he shouted. "You want to scare people. Show yourself." The woods accepted him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then came the scream. It was short, sharp, and terrible, cut off as though something had closed a hand around his throat. For a heartbeat, none of them moved. The fire dimmed. Somewhere in the darkness, something heavy shifted, and the sound of it stepping forward carried clearly now. The night drew inward, and the nightmare began. They ran. Branches clawed at their faces and arms as they fled blindly toward the village, the ground uneven beneath their feet, roots and stones threatening to send them sprawling at every step. Their breath burned in their chests, each gasp sharp and painful, as though the cold air itself were cutting them open from within. Behind them came the sound of pursuit. It was not the crashing, careless noise of a beast forcing its way through undergrowth. It was faster than that. Purposeful. Close enough that they could feel it, a pressure at their backs, a presence that seemed to fill the darkness between the trees. Linda stumbled. It happened so quickly that Jess did not realize at first that Linda was no longer beside her. There was a sharp cry, more of surprise than pain, and then a sound that none of them would ever forget. A deep, tearing snarl followed by the sickening crack of something breaking. They did not look back. The cemetery gate loomed ahead, its iron bars gleaming faintly in the moonlight. They burst through it and ran among the leaning stones, their shadows stretching grotesquely across the ground. At the far edge stood the small keeper's hut, its door hanging crookedly on its hinges. They threw themselves inside and slammed it shut. The darkness within was thick and close. Jess pressed her back against the door, her heart hammering so violently she feared it might give them away. Tyler collapsed onto the dirt floor, shaking so badly he could not stand. Howard stood in the center of the hut, his face pale, his eyes wide and unfocused. "It's still out there," Tyler whispered. No one answered him. They listened. Outside, something moved among the gravestones. Footsteps, slow now, deliberate, passed close to the hut, then receded. A low sound followed, not quite a growl, not quite breath. Jess covered her mouth with both hands. "This isn't possible," Howard murmured. "It can't be." "It killed them," Tyler said. "Ron. Linda." Howard shook his head as if to clear it. "No. There has to be an explanation. Some kind of animal. Or people." Jess turned on him, her voice breaking. "Did that sound like an animal to you?" Silence answered her. Minutes stretched into something longer, heavier. Time lost its edges. The cold seeped through the thin walls of the hut, settling into their bones. Every sound outside felt amplified, the creak of branches, the whisper of grass, the distant splash of something moving in the marsh. Howard wiped his hands on his jacket, leaving dark streaks of sweat. "I'll check," he said at last. Tyler's head snapped up. "No, don't." "We can't just stay here," Howard insisted, though his voice trembled. "If it's gone, if there's a chance." "There isn't," Jess said quietly. Howard hesitated, his hand hovering over the door. For a moment it seemed as though he might listen. Then he opened it. The night rushed in. A massive shape surged forward, impossibly fast. There was a single terrible glimpse of fur and red light, and then Howard was wrenched from the doorway with a cry that cut off mid-syllable. The door swung shut on its own. Jess and Tyler did not move. They did not speak. They sat in the darkness, listening to the sounds outside fade once more into silence, until silence itself became unbearable. When they finally ran, it was without looking back. The inn was in sight when the howl split the air. They turned. The creature stood before them, towering, furred, eyes burning red. "I told you to leave," it said. The moonlight shifted, fur receded, fangs dulled. The graveyard keeper stood there, human once more. "Go," he said, "and never return." Dawn broke. They ran. Years later, Black Hollow still stands. The inn still opens. The lanterns still burn. And once a year, when the moon is full, no one leaves their home, because the beast feeds and the hollow remembers. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, feel free to like the video, share it with a fellow night wanderer, and subscribe before something else does it for you. Until next time, short ghost stories long after midnight.